We're watching Hurricane Dorian as it closes in on the coast of South Carolina on what could become the storm's most dangerous day for the U.S. Mass evacuations have been ordered in South Carolina, which is now bracing for its worst flooding in decades. We'll get a report on the storm from our friend Al Roker in just a minute, but it may have been these images that we first showed you here on this program yesterday of the devastation in the Bahamas that inspired Donald Trump earlier today to send the U.S. Coast Guard to provide humanitarian relief to residents there. 7 people have been reported dead in the Bahamas, but that death toll is expected to rise as aid workers can now finally begin the long road to recovery from what the Bahamas Prime Minister is calling one of the greatest national crises in the country's history. But let us first bring in the news from the White House. Washington Post just reporting a few minutes ago that on Wednesday it appears the White House attempted to retroactively correct a tweet that the president issued over the weekend in which he warned erroneously that Alabama would be impacted by Hurricane Dorian. In a White House video released Wednesday, Trump displays a modified National Hurricane Center cone of uncertainty forecast dated from 11 a.m. on August 29th. Indicating that Alabama would in fact be impacted. The graphic appears to have been altered with a Sharpie to indicate a risk the storm would move into Alabama from Florida. For more on this, let's turn to some of our favorite reporters and friends. Joining us for the top of the hour in Washington, New York Times White House correspondent Annie Karni with us at the table, NBC and MSNBC national affairs analyst John Heilemann, LA Times White House reporter Eli Stokols, Democratic strategist Basil Smikle, and the aforementioned Al Roker's here. Al, you flagged this for me, and it was because we started this conversation yesterday in what seemed like an unprecedented correction. I won't call it a rebuke, but correction from the National Weather Service about some inaccurate information Donald Trump put out about Alabama. Storms are life and death situations, and any public official who starts talking about where a storm's going to go is messing with people's plans for their own family's safety. National Weather Service corrected that, and it appears today in the Oval Office there was a doctored image. Talk about how dangerous it is to have misinformation out there about the weather.
Well, for people, they worry about, when they see us give a forecast, show the cone of uncertainty, show the path. They're taking that at our word. And so, the National Hurricane Center, they're dedicated professionals who put that out. The problem is,
Al, I'm told we can't hear you. We're going to get you mic'd up, but let me start with some reporters used to covering Donald Trump's disinformation, but maybe Eli Stokols not used to covering it in the context of a storm barreling toward the United States.
Well, we don't know exactly who altered that map, but you can tell it's obvious that somebody altered it. That was not the official map did not include that little black line. And we know that this is a president
we have a picture of that map. Can we put up?
Sharpies to annotate news stories, to write on photographs. There are Sharpies with the president's signature all around the West Wing. And it appears that that's, what was used to draw onto that map. A couple days after the president, as you point out, wrongly tweeted that the storm was headed to Alabama. We don't know that the president was the one to do this, but again, we know that this is a president who is pretty shameless and who has a real hard time admitting when he makes a mistake. And it's not that hard to fathom that in a situation like this where ostensibly you have a briefing in the Oval Office to call reporters in and to warn the public and the country about which direction the storm is going, to talk about government preparedness for the storm, it's fathomable that this president could have been preoccupied with, laying down again, defending himself and saying, I was right about the storm possibly going to Alabama, when obviously he was not right about that. He already went after a reporter on Twitter the other day about this, so it's clearly a sensitive subject for him. And again, it seems like a small thing in the context of the other news and the enormity of a storm and the impact on people. But this is telling about this president.
It's not a small thing if you live in Florida or Alabama and you're trying to decide whether to be in town for the first day of school or evacuate with your family. It is not a small thing to take a pen to a graphic that I don't know who made that marking, but that hand, let me see that image again. The hand belongs to Donald J. Trump. In Donald J. Trump's hand is a doctored image of the hurricane path. Al?
What's interesting is there is a graphic, there's a photo from the White House that shows the president being briefed on August 29th, the day that was there, and it does not have that
added little black Sharpie.
Do we have that image? Do we have the original image before it was altered?
It's there.
There it is, Al.
But there's also an image from the White House that shows the president being briefed holding that. I've actually tweeted that out. It's from the White House's website. So it was there somewhere in between then and now that mark got added. So, and again, we don't know who added it. I'm just saying.
Let me just ask you what I tried to ask you before we had your mic on. This is what it looks like to screw the wings on at 30,000 feet. What is the importance of accurate information for the people living potentially in harm's way?
Look, we are the disseminators of this information, but the hardworking people, the National Hurricane Center and the National Weather Service work diligently 24/7 to get the right information out because, as you said, these are people's lives and their livelihoods, and they don't put these things out lightly. So it's very important to put the path out and the cone of uncertainty because that's why we want the people to be aware of where this thing could go. If you add to that or subtract from that, that is now changing the way people can make an informed decision about their life and their livelihood.
So give us the real news, the accurate information about this storm and who among our viewers needs to be on high alert or evacuating?
Well, it's a wide swath, Nicole. In fact, as we look at the radar right now, from the eye of the storm to where you see these rain bands in Cape Hatteras, that's 400 miles, almost 400 miles. And we're seeing very strong activity developing on this outer rim, and that's going to be swinging back down. You can see from Jacksonville to Daytona, all the way down still to Melbourne, we are looking at this storm that is just churning around. And one of the things we have to be worried about, we had a hurricane, tropical storm. We also had a tornado warning this morning. Well, we may see more tornadoes from Myrtle Beach to Savannah. These are quick spinning up. They're short-lived, but they're rain wraps, so they're hard to see, generally weak. So besides everything else that's going on, we have to worry about tornadoes now as this system moves up. We've got tropical force winds from Wilmington all the way down to Daytona as this thing spins. The latest from the National Hurricane Center, we'll get a complete package of updates at 5 o'clock. But lately, it's 115 miles east of Jacksonville, 105-mile-per-hour winds, moving north-northwest at 9. The hurricane warnings stretch right now from just north of Melbourne all the way to Cape Hatteras. We're looking at tropical storm warnings back inland. So that gives you an idea of how powerful this is, all the way from Jacksonville up into the border of North Carolina and Virginia. And now we've got tropical storm watches for Norfolk as well. So we're going to be watching that. This system, the path now brings it past Charleston, Wilmington, Cape Hatteras by Friday morning, and then out to sea. The American model and the national and the European models are in now. And the European model gives us a landfall somewhere south of Wilmington Friday morning, most likely. And then again, possibly Cape Hatteras. So we're going to have to watch that. We may actually still have a landfall from this system. Here's what we look for as far as the effects. Jacksonville today, 30 to 60 mile-per-hour winds, 3 to 5 foot storm surge, rainfall 2 to 4 feet. Tropical force winds extend out 175 miles from the center. So you can see inland, there's going to be that effect. 50 to 85 mile-per-hour winds tomorrow for Charleston. Storm surge 4 to 7 feet, 8 to 15 inches of rainfall. 8 to 15 inches of rainfall plus a storm surge. And look at Friday morning from Norfolk to Wilmington. 55 to 85 mile-per-hour winds, a storm surge of 4 to 7 feet, and rainfall 6 to 15 inches. We talk about that storm surge, 6 to 9 feet above high tides that will be happening early tomorrow morning around 1:15 or so to 1:45, and that stretches to Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, and Cape Hatteras as well. The rainfall, as we said, anywhere from 5 to 10 inches of rain, but isolated amounts can't be ruled out, 15 inches. And the other big thing we have to worry about, we have to talk about power outages. Now, along the Florida coastline, you've got more tropical vegetation, so the power outages may not be as bad. But as you travel up to Savannah, Charleston, Florence, Myrtle Beach, Wilmington, Kingston, Cape Hatteras, Norfolk, we've got more, indigenous kind of trees that are still in full foliage. And if those come down, power lines come down. And so we are going to be looking at major power outages as well. So we've got storm surge, we've got winds, we've got rain, and most likely power outages out of this system.
Al, I don't know if we have the technology for this. I'd ask you to wander over to the table for some of this. It feels like this is the kind of storm that changes by the minute.
It does.
It's been going on a long time. We talked yesterday about a little bit of fatigue. And I just, not to pull you into the political conversation here, but this is a president who, since the day he was inaugurated, even before, has been screaming fake news from the top of his lungs. I just want to get you on the record of what the trusted sources of information are for people who may be concerned and who may now have in circulation. You said you tweeted out the accurate picture. There is a doctored image of where the storm is not heading, a black Sharpie circling Alabama.
Which actually is against the law to put out an altered government forecast. So just throwing that out as well.
In the Oval Office, president's sitting behind the desk, resolute desk, in the Oval Office. I find this kind of like, we don't know what happened between, without, you don't have to speculate.
No, we don't know who did it. We're not saying who did it, but that's the president's hand on a doctored image of a storm path. And
sitting behind the desk, in the Oval Office.
The forecast you just detailed is terrifying, both in its scope, its slowness, and the kinds of dangers people are in. I mean, we've covered enough of these, and I haven't been doing this for very long, to know that a power outage for an elderly community is a life and death situation.
Look, this is a serious storm. First of all, it now holds the record of the slowest major hurricane in the Atlantic for a 24-hour period. Sat over the Bahamas for 51 days, 51 hours, I should say, 51 hours, 41 of them over the northern Bahamas. It dropped about 60 inches of rain in some places. So it was a powerful storm, and it rapidly intensified. We have seen this increase of rapidly intensifying hurricanes. The last 3 Category 5 storms were rapidly intensifying. Rapid intensification, the definition is an increase of 35 miles per hour within 24 hours. This thing intensified more than 35 miles per hour in 9 hours. And so it's a powerful storm now, and it slowed down, and now it's picking up speed. But even at 9 miles per hour, it's still relatively slow and can do really serious damage from the Florida southeast coast, the Georgia coast, North Carolina, South Carolina, and I think Virginia now is going to be in play. The places people want to check, besides, I think, our websites, but if you go to the source, which is where we go to, National Hurricane Center, the National Weather Service, NOAA.com, all of these are places, NOAA.org, I should say, .gov. These are all very accurate. These are the places we look at. So
no doctored photos.
No doctored photos. No images. This is the direct from the horse's mouth.
Al Roker, thank you so much. Thank you for being our trusted source of information. Let me reset for our viewers. We came on the air with the Washington Post posting this story. President Trump shows doctored hurricane chart. Was it to cover up for Alabama Twitter flub? And here's some of that reporting from the Washington Post. On Wednesday, it appears the White House attempted to retroactively correct a tweet that President Trump issued over the weekend in which he warned erroneously that Alabama would be impacted by Hurricane Dorian. In a White House video released Wednesday, Trump displays a modified National Hurricane Center cone of uncertainty forecast dated from 11 a.m. on August 29th, indicating Alabama would in fact be impacted. The graphic appears to have been altered with a Sharpie to indicate a risk the storm would move into Alabama from Florida. And as our viewers know from Al Roker, who just reported that original photo does not show Alabama circled in a black Sharpie. Karni, this does have the makings for a uniquely Trumpian spin on fake news. And again, this is a president who was known over the weekend to have been talking to friends about mistakes in the media, about his growing and sustained ire for the media and its coverage of him. We know from Al Roker that image with the Sharpie, not an official image of the path of this very dangerous, slow-moving storm.
This is a very Trumpian moment. It is like Kellyanne Conway introduced us long ago to alternative facts. This seems to be alternative maps of some sort. We know that this White House has put out false statements about pictures from day one of the inauguration claiming crowd sizes were bigger than Obama's when there was photographic evidence that there wasn't. This reminds me of those incidents where you have a clear, like not even a well-doctored photo. We could keep calling it a doctored photo. It's just a line drawn with a Sharpie. It's not like a sleight of hand made to look like an official map. It's confusing the way it's done there. And this is a moment we keep, everyone keeps saying we don't know who did it. And I think the real issue here is whether Trump did it himself or an aide did it because they knew he wouldn't want to be wrong about the tweet and they're anticipating that this is the way he would want to correct it, is also worrisome. And I'm wondering if a map like this, where, as Al Roker just told us, it's illegal to tamper with an official map. Is this an example of where some of the guardrails that used to be in place in the White House aren't, that someone in the inner circle who has the stature with him to say, Mr. President, you cannot hold that up, we need to take that out of here, isn't there anymore? That's a question that this raises for me.
No, it's the perfect question, Andy Karni. I want to show you, the president just responded to this, but it's a question we're going to come back to on the other side. Here's the president responding.
President, you showed us a map earlier, the initial forecast.
Yeah.
It appeared to have been, I guess, edited or something to include Alabama. Can you explain how that change was made?
No, I just know, I know that Alabama was in the original forecast. They thought it would get it as a piece of it. It was supposed to go, actually, we have a better map than that, which is going to be presented, where we had many lines going directly, many models, each line being a model, and they were going directly through. And in all cases, Alabama was hit, if not lightly, in some cases pretty hard. Georgia, Alabama was a different route. They actually gave that a 95% chance probability. It turned out that that was not what happened. It made the right turn up the coast. But Alabama was hit very hard and was going to be hit very hard along with Georgia. But under the current, they won't be. Georgia will be possibly. We're going to see. We're right at that point right now. But I think Georgia's going to be in great shape. Everyone's going to be in great shape because we're going to take care of it regardless. But the original path was through Florida. That was probably 3 days. I think that's probably 3-4 days old. The original path that most people thought it was going to be taken, as you know, was right through Florida, where on the right would have been Georgia, Alabama, et cetera.
And that map that you showed us today, it looked like it almost had like a Sharpie.
I don't know.
So, Andy Karni, the Washington Post lie count has the president somewhere between 10,000 and 11,000 lies. When we came on the air, I didn't check it for the latest, but we know it was a lie that the National Alabama Weather Service felt the need to respond to in real time. Here's that reporting from over the weekend. Trump's tweet on Sunday about Alabama came as Dorian was hitting the Bahamas as a high-end Cat 5 hurricane sparked enough public alarm that it prompted the National Weather Service in Birmingham, Alabama, to bluntly tweet 20 minutes later, quote, Alabama will not see any impacts from Dorian. So here's the president Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, 4 days later, quadrupling down on the lie. I mean, what is, from your body of reporting about this president, what is it that makes him sort of re-up a lie 4 days later and one correction from the National Weather Service later?
I mean, this one is truly a strange one, because this is not a political adversary that he's going after, and it's he punches back and he punches back harder than he got hit. This is you'd think that the weather being corrected about the actual path of a storm, we would think that you'd say, oh, it's what a relief that we were mistaken and it's not going to hit Alabama as we thought it won't. But in general, he doesn't like to concede any ground and admit that he was wrong. You can count on one hand the times that he's, had to have been forced to apologize, didn't like to do it. But this is a strange one because it doesn't seem to be scoring any political points in terms of taking it back.
John Heilemann, it's a story that broke at 3:55. People were starting to pick up some steam on Twitter. And to me, it's the most important thing to do today, is to show that there's nothing too small for Trump to lie about. There's nothing he won't quadruple down on. And let me tell you something, I lived in Tallahassee, I lived in Florida. They're really good at preparing for hurricanes, but they rely on accurate information. And it's no joke to mess with a forecast. So it might seem like a line with a Sharpie, but I think the intersection of a president who rails against fake news all day, every day, and a storm that is hitting this country today and truly jeopardizes people's lives and livelihood is a serious enough thing to stop and say, what is going on?
Yeah, well, there's a whole bunch of things to say about this. One of them is that we have often remarked on the fact that Trump has been incredibly lucky in that the chaos and the lies that have devalued the currency, the most fundamental currency a president has, which is trust, that they have not had significant real-world consequences outside of Puerto Rico, which is obviously there have been some disasters. There have obviously mass shootings. Not to say there's no body count in this presidency, but what we haven't seen is the moment that we've all kind of expected, that there would be a real-time crisis where Trump's lies and ignorance and the way in which he defiles and devalues the most, not just the trust he has, but the stage on which that trust resides historically, places like the podium in the White House briefing room, the Oval Office behind the president's desk, that we would see this moment like that where it would happen. This is a terrible moment for people who've been in the path of this storm. Luckily, Alabamans are not. So his lie is maybe causing some panic in their worlds, and that is obviously a serious thing. But this gives you a taste of what it would be like, given that Trump can't not lie about everything. And then when caught in a lie, to the elaborateness, the Baroque quality of the reinforcement. 95%, he's saying this is not just Alabama might have gotten hit, but Alabama was going to be hit. It was 95% certainty that Alabama was going to be hit. It was going right through there. Everybody thought it. All of those things are demonstrable lies, right? And he's not just doubling down on the original lie. He's exaggerating the lie. He's making the lie bigger. And then, as I said a second ago when Al was here, just the fact of him sitting there in the Oval Office on this day, when we know that map, whatever fantasy was in his head or error was in his head about Alabama getting hit, we know Alabama's not going to be hit. Right. And yet, on the day the storm is hitting, sitting there behind that desk with that thing, disseminating more false information from within the Oval Office. I'm sorry, but it's still... we've all become accustomed to the lies on the Twitter feed, et cetera. But to see him behind that desk holding that doctored photo, that doctored graphic, is just like,
it's startling.
My God.
I'm with you. And listen, go ahead, Annie.
Sorry, I was just going to add that the stakes here are much higher, but this kind of small lie that is tangible and we can see reminded me of the kind of when he claimed that he'd not called Tim Cook, the CEO of Apple, Tim Apple, when it was on tape. And anyone could listen and hear it, and it doesn't really matter. It's not an embarrassing slip-up. It's kind of funny. And yet his reaction to that was, I didn't say that. I said Cook very quietly, and that's not what happened. It's just I think part of here is not like, just cannot be embarrassed and views kind of having to say there was a slip-up as an embarrassment.
I think to everything, and I've asked Eli, I've asked you, I've asked Annie on the show what it's like to cover someone who lies, at a clip we've never seen before. But I guess the three dots to assemble for our viewers trying to make sense of this, and heaven forbid anyone in this storm's path trying to get the right information. He said to his crowd at a MAGA rally, "Don't believe what you see. Don't believe what you hear." And I guess what we have from the president today, lying on the fourth day after being caught, not by a political enemy, not by the media, by the Alabama Office of the National Weather Service. We see him doubling down today. We're now going to spend valuable time trying to figure out whose Sharpie it was that made that mark instead of figuring out why he lied and why he's in the pocket of the NRA after another mass shooting over the weekend. But we know the president can't have his supporters know the truth about him. We know that because he told them not to believe what they see and hear.
Well, and the emotional connection, so much of what he has with his base is telling his base that everybody but him is wrong. So the media is wrong. And so it sort of, inoculates him and allows him to just make stuff up and get people to believe it because they want to believe it. And that's sort of where we're at. We're so far through the looking glass on this. I mean, he's raging right now to anyone who will listen about media coverage. And yet none of us would be talking about his screw up tweet about Alabama a couple days ago if somebody hadn't drawn that line with a Sharpie on the map. So there's this self-fulfilling prophecy aspect to so much of this because we have to just cover and point to things when the behavior is incredibly aberrant, when there are attempts to mislead the public that seem self-serving and also are of huge consequence in terms of public safety, as you and Al pointed out. So we have to talk about these things, and then that just gets him raging more and more upset about the news and telling people that the news is fake and they're just out to get me and isn't the news so negative. And it's really hard to sort of prioritize and decide what lies matter, what lies don't, because there are so many of them. I mean, Al said rightly that drawing a line and changing a map, a weather map, is a crime. It's also a crime to lie about something to mislead the markets. A week ago, you had the president lying about calls with China in an effort to settle the markets. So his behavior oftentimes is really crossing that boundary of what's acceptable, what's legal, and obviously what's truthful. And that's a huge challenge for all of us covering it, because it comes like a fire hose every day.
Last word.
I take a point that you made when I think about political trust and political authority, that when voters go to the polls, they think about their policy preferences, what's important to them, but they also think about their elected leaders as someone who's going to act authoritatively in moments of crisis. So when you have this president, essentially, I want to call it fake news if the consequences weren't so tragic for potential citizens. But when he does something like this, it makes you wonder, can I even trust this president in the time of emergency to give me the correct information so that I can mobilize not just myself, my family, as you pointed out earlier, but law enforcement as well, who apparently would my guess is
attacked on his Twitter feed, attacked the FBI, I think, yesterday.
And if you're in Alabama and you're law enforcement and you're probably fielding calls from citizens saying, and residents saying, my God, I saw this on the news, what's happening?
Absolutely. Or I saw, if you're one of the
And
63 million people
right.
who follow Trump on Twitter, you've got bad information.
It's just, the thing about it, it's pathological, because it's the easiest. Some of these other lies, at least I understand why he wants to mislead the markets. That's not excusing it, but it's the motivation is clear. This is like, all he had to do the day that he made the mistake was go, hey, I screwed up. I heard Alabama. I made a mistake. No one would have dinged him if he just said, hey, I messed this up. Sorry.
Right.
Exactly.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.